Okay, I think I'll begin this as all of you are zooming in and joining our event. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's 2021 West Anchorage Candidates Forum featuring mayoral candidates on the Municipality of Anchorage April 6th election ballot. All mayoral candidates were invited to attend this event. My name is Kathy Gleason, and I'm currently serving as acting president of Turnagain Community Council. I am joined this evening by my colleagues from North Star, Sand Lake, Spenard, and Midtown Community Councils. It has been my privilege to work with representatives from each of these hosting councils to help organize tonight's event. At this time, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge that the members of our community councils live, work, and play on Dena'ina land. For the past several years, we have held West Anchorage Candidates Forums in person at Spenard Recreation Center, and we certainly plan to do that again in the future. But as so many have had to do during this pandemic, this mayoral forum is being conducted virtually, and we apologize in advance for any technical glitches that may occur. We welcome the mayoral candidates to our forum this evening, and thank you for your participation. We please ask all candidates to be courteous, respectful of our ground rules, and please direct your responses to the audience. Thank you as well to all members of the public who have joined us via Zoom this evening. You may have already received your April 6th vote by mail municipal ballot. I know I did. I got mine today. We hope you find this forum to be helpful and informative, and no matter who or what you support on the ballot, please vote. Our moderator this evening is Ms. Tani Sakarichia. She's a board member of the Turnagain Spenard Community Council, and our timekeeper is Ms. Meg Milkey. She's secretary of Spenard Community Council. Again, welcome to our West Anchorage Mayoral Candidates Forum. I will now pass the virtual mic over to our moderator, Tani.
Thanks, Kathy. Hello and good evening, everyone. My name is Tani, and as Kathy mentioned, I'll be the moderator for tonight's West Anchorage Mayoral Candidates Forum. I wanted to start by welcoming all the candidates who joined us tonight and everybody who is watching this forum online. The format for tonight's forum is a Zoom webinar. This may look slightly different from the regular Zoom meetings we've all become familiar with over the last year. For the audience, you may notice the two-way chat function has been disabled. This is to ensure attention is focused on the candidate and their responses. This is also why your current view setting has been set to active speaker versus gallery view. Additionally, due to the number of candidates running for office, there will not be a question and answer portion with the public. Rather, our planning committee solicited questions ahead of time from members of our respective community councils. We then went through a list of all the questions and narrowed it down to the top 8, which will be presented here tonight. Candidates have not seen these questions in advance. For candidates, as a reminder, keep yourself on mute when it's not your turn to answer questions and confirm you are off mute when it is your turn to speak. If you forget to mute yourself, our support staff will do it for you. This is to ensure there are no distractions when another candidate is speaking. In case of any technical issues or delays, our hardworking technical support crew will work to fix any issues in a timely manner and with as little as disruption as possible to tonight's forum. So let's continue in our program with an overview of tonight's ground rules. A series of yes/no questions were sent to candidates ahead of time. Their responses will be shared in a follow-up email to registered attendees, as well as posted on our social media channels. We'll start the forum tonight with introductions, which are limited to 30 seconds each. After which, questions compiled by the co-sponsoring community councils will be asked, and which will be directed to each candidate in random order. Individual answers will be limited to 1 minute each. Candidates, after I read each question, it will be shared in the chat feed. If at any point you need me to repeat the question, please ask. Meg, our timekeeper, has a stopwatch and will hold up time limit signs for panelists to keep our event running smoothly. Panelists, please make sure you are in gallery viewing mode so you can see her. She will hold up a 30-second warning, a 15-second warning, and a red stop sign when your time is up. In lieu of a bell and to keep us on schedule, we'll mute your microphone when your time is finished. And finally, we ran out of time at our last forum, so we may not have closing statements. If by chance we have time for closing statements, candidates will be limited to a 30-second response. So with that, let us begin with introductions with our which are limited to 1-minute responses. Tonight, we will start off with Mr. Bill Evans.
Thank you, and thank you to the West Anchorage Community Councils for this event. I'm glad to be here. My name is Bill Evans. I was born and raised in Cleveland, Ohio. I was raised by a single mom. I was the first person in my family actually to graduate from high school, very working class origins. Went on to the military, served in the military. Was also a police officer while I worked my way through college. Went on to law school and have been a labor and employment attorney on the management side since 1992. Moved up to Anchorage in 1998 with my wife and our 3 small children. I have been very involved in Anchorage in a number of ways. I spent 13 years on the Anchorage Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors. I was twice chair of that organization. I was on the Municipal Transportation Commission, Municipal Employee Relations Board. I served on the Anchorage Assembly from 2014 to 2017, representing South Anchorage. And I'm interested in actually solving the problems that plague Anchorage. I have a reputation of reasonableness and working with others to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. Next will be Mr. Albert Swank.
Yes, my name is Albert Swank. I was born and raised in Anchorage, 1950. Excuse me. I have my own engineering and scientific consulting business. I've had it for 50 years. My family came to this state, came to Anchorage in 1930. The family came in the 1890s, but we've been in Anchorage since 1930. I have done a wide range of projects around Alaska, Anchorage, including Anchorage, and the rest of the state, basically $18 billion worth of projects in my business and also working for others. I'm familiar and have worked for all the versions of our city government. And by that, I'm talking about the original city of Anchorage, the greater Anchorage area borough, and the MOA. And I'm familiar with everything. I've done quite a bit of extensive work with the MOA in reference to major projects. The entire solid waste system is mine. The regional landfill, I arranged the transfer, we conceived it, the federal government, everything, period, end of story. And then a lot of other.
Thank you, Mr. Swank. Next will be Mr. Mike Robbins.
Thank you very much for inviting us to the meeting tonight, and I look forward to getting your questions. My name is Mike Robbins. I moved to Spenard with my dad in 1975. Since then, Anchorage has been my home. It's a city where I went to school, where I built my businesses, served our community, and it's a city where I've been married to my wife for 18 years, and we've raised our 3 kids. I love Anchorage, but I've never seen our city more trouble than she is today. Our businesses are closed, jobs have been lost, homeless wander our streets, our parks are dirty, and crime is on the rise. And young and old alike are leaving, and sadly, our quality of life is in decline. I know that we can do better, and that's why I'm running for mayor. I know with the right kind of leadership, we can improve our quality of life for everybody who calls Anchorage home. And I promise that if you elect me the next mayor, I will work hard every day to make Anchorage a safer, cleaner, and more prosperous city. I look forward to the rest of the questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Mr. Jeffrey Brown. I don't see him. Oh, Mr. Brown, you're on mute.
Yeah, there we go. I got you back. I'm Jeffrey Brown. I'm running for mayor because I really believe that we have an electoral process here. And quite frankly, all over our country that's hyper partisan. I think that most of the candidates that have taken major donations are pretty polarized and for the most part politically. And I think that's very divisive. It's like a ship that's listing. I want to be that rudder. I grew up in Manhattan, Kansas. I've been here since 1997. I have a wife and 5 wonderful children. I have been a social worker for the past 25 years. And I've managed people and supervised people in the nonprofits. And I just really believe I can do a good job and that I am not as apt to be beholden to large amounts of money, to the tune of $250,000 for donor groups as small as 400 and 500 people. You know, considering the number of people who actually vote, that's a couple dollars per head. I think we need a change.
Thank you. Next is Mr. David Bronson.
Great, thanks, Tony in West Anchorage. My name is Dave Bronson. My wife, Deb, and I have been married for 36 years, and we've lived in Anchorage for 30 years. We've raised our 2 kids here, and we intend on growing old here. I'm a 24-year veteran of the Air Force, the Alaska Air National Guard, where I was a pilot and maintenance officer, and I retired from the Guard in 2005 as a lieutenant colonel. And then just this last September, I retired from a 30-year career as a commercial pilot. I'm running for mayor because, like many of you, I no longer recognize my city. We have a serious vagrancy and homeless problem. Crime is growing on our streets. Our local government seems absolutely out of control. As mayor, I will work with our public-private partnerships to find real solutions to our vagrancy crisis. I will empower our police to get control of the crime that is filling our streets. And I'll work with small businesses to help reverse the damage of the mandates by refunding property taxes for the period they were shut down. I believe Anchorage needs a new leader. I think I am that leader, and I will take Anchorage in a clear new direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bronson. Next, we have Miss Heather Herndon.
Hello, my name is Heather Herndon. I'm 4th generation Alaskan. I was born and raised here in Anchorage, Alaska. I went to West High School. I went to Central before that in Fairview Elementary. We were here in this house 50 years now, and before the streets were paved. My background is I have a master's in finance and accounting, and my background started with the Alyeska pipeline. We were building refueling skids with NEI fluid technology. And then I became an auditor in public accounting. And from there, I went to work with Real Estate Investment Trust, up to $3 billion of portfolio management and construction, everything in between. I'm the only one that's written private placement memorandums as a financial instrument. I look forward to decreasing taxes and bringing STEM jobs to Anchorage. And I appreciate your time and appreciate being here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Herndon. Next, we have Mr. George Martinez.
Well, good evening, West Side Community Councils. Thank you for the opportunity to be here with you all today. My name is George Martinez. I am the independent choice for mayor of Anchorage, and my website is george2021.com, where you can learn a little more about my background and part of our vision as well. Anchorage is a diverse city, and with this diversity comes an inherent economic opportunity. My vision is for a connected, safe, and thriving city where our economy grows, where every neighborhood and family flourishes, and where our children are healthy and successful. We once were a city with visions of calling ourselves a city of lights and flowers, with aspirations of an Olympic bid, and a group of bridge builders imagining that one day Anchorage would be that city without prejudice. Today, we have high levels of toxic partisanship. And my belief is the role of the next mayor is to turn down the toxic partisanship, bring people back to the space where we have the values of working together, roll our sleeves up, and move Anchorage forward. I appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Forrest Dunbar, you're next.
Well, thank you, Tawny, and thank you to the West Anchorage Community Councils that organized this event. My name is Forrest Dunbar, and I'm running for mayor to get us past this public health crisis and get our economy back on track. A little about me, I'm a lifelong Alaskan, raised in Eagle on the Yukon River, the land of the Han-Gwich'in, and then Cordova, the home of the Eyak people. My parents are Miriam, a former special education aide and librarian, and Roger, who worked for 30 years for Fish and Game. Growing up, I worked as a wildland firefighter, commercial fisherman, and stocked shelves at Fred Meyer. I've made a home in East Anchorage, where I serve as a captain in the Alaska Army National Guard and on the Assembly. Since I was first elected in April of 2016, I've focused on jobs, quality of life, public safety, and homelessness. I've also worked in the community as the vice president of the Scenic Foothills Community Council, helped found the Molding Farmers Market, and currently serve on the board of the Anchorage Park Foundation. I'm running for mayor because I want to make Anchorage an even better place to live, and because we need reasonable, fact-based leadership to get us through the current crisis and into a strong economic recovery. Let's get Anchorage back to work. Thank you.
Thank you, Forrest. Mr. Joe Westfall, you're next. Oh, you're on mute. Joe, we can, oh, there you go.
Okay, finally let go. Okay, first I want to appreciate you folks for subjecting yourself to this fine entertainment that we're giving you. I am an engineer. I have never been a public employee and I've never been a politician. So I came up here in '82 from Texas. I was working for Texas Instruments as an engineer, and I came here to help start GCI. And after retiring from GCI, I actually went, before then I started my engineering company and have been working with the oil field industry primarily through myself and some other at least people. So anyhow, I think the reason I got into this, am I crazy or what? I'm retired, but I decided that Anchorage is in trouble and I think I'd like to throw my hat in the ring and apply logic. Close.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Westfall. Next, we have Mr. Bill Falsey.
Well, my thanks to the organizers. I am Bill Falsey. For the past 5 years, I served the community, most recently as municipal manager, and before that as city attorney. I am the only candidate in the race with both executive management and local government experience. And I'm running because I know our best days are still ahead of us, and I am invested in that future because this is my hometown. I'm the son of David, whose job in the Air Force brought us to Elmendorf, and of Margie, who taught special ed at Rabbit Creek. I went to Central and Diamond. I'm currently a resident of Sand Lake. This is where my wife, Jeanette, and I are raising our 2 kids. And I'm looking ahead at the post-COVID Zoom-enabled work from anywhere economy, and that should play to our strengths, but we have some difficult days ahead of us. And I've helped us through some tough times in the past, the November 2018 earthquake, the 2019 wildfire season, and in 2020 as incident commander overseeing our on-the-ground response to the pandemic. We got through those times while also delivering on big issues like the sale of MLNP and rebuilding the port. I'd like to take that same leadership and dedication into the mayor's office, and I'm looking forward to tonight's discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Falsey. And thank you to all candidates for those thoughtful introductions. Just a quick note to folks that all 15 mayoral candidates were invited to attend tonight's forum, but for whatever reason, some are unable to be here tonight. Now we are going to move through our list of 8 questions. As a reminder, all candidates will have up to 1 minute to provide a response. A copy of the question will be added to the chat, but let me know if you would like me to read the question out loud again. So question number 1 is a 2-part question. What are your top 3 priorities for Anchorage? And what obstacles do you believe must be overcome to achieve these goals? Let's go to Mr. Robbins to kick us off for this evening.
Thank you very much for the question. My top 3 priorities for Anchorage, first of all, will be to get the city open. Second of all, will be to get our economy restarted and get our small businesses open, get our employees back to work. At the same time, we'll need to work to rebuild the tourism industry specifically, as well as our hospitality industry. They've been extremely hard hit by the last year. Our third priority will be to use the power of the mayor's office to leverage a solution for our homeless situation here in Anchorage. We need to bring together a private, nonprofit, and for-profit partnership so that we can stop the flow of homeless folks into our homeless system and help those that are in the homeless system now to be home secure. The stumbling blocks to making any of these changes is to, first of all, elect a mayor that has the vision for our city that will take us in the direction that we need to go. One that involves getting control of growing taxes, making sure that things like the new rainwater tax don't pass and don't happen. A city where a mayor who understands how to lead and understands how to bring the right kind of team to bear to help our city get back on track. Thank you.
Thank you for that response. Next is Mr. Westfeld.
There we go. I think one of the big, homeless is a big situation that everybody's been throwing around like a football. But one of the big things that I think we must first attack is the retail industry, getting the retail industry and the people that lost their jobs back in business. A good sector of the government issue did not lose their jobs, but a lot of people in the private sector did. So we need to get that rolling again without restrictions. Businesses that have a problem generally create a hotspot, and that hotspot could be dealt with on an individual basis. And other than that, we need to figure out a way to bypass Canada to get cruise ships back in here. And I'll turn it over at that point.
Thank you. Next is Mr. Dunbar.
Well, thank you, Tani. The top three priorities for my administration will be getting us through the last part of this pandemic, getting our economy back on track, short-term economic recovery this summer, and then working towards long-term economic growth and economic diversification. With regard to the pandemic, the new mayor will be sworn in on July 1st, and we're all, of course, very hopeful that the vaccine rollout will continue to go well, and we'll be largely through the pandemic. But we have to continue to listen to public health experts as needed. In terms of economic recovery in the short term, there is a tremendous amount of federal aid that is on the way, and it's important that we get it to the people that need it, particularly small businesses and people with mortgage problems as quickly as possible. In terms of long-term economic growth, there are things that we can do to make this a thriving, vibrant city. We can revitalize downtown. We can invest in our outdoor economy, our visitor economy, attract the independent travelers through an Office of Outdoor Recreation, and we can be globally competitive. People can work from anywhere. They should want to work here. To do that, we'll have to offer a uniquely high quality of life. Thank you.
Mr. Martinez.
Thank you for the question. Anchorage is well positioned to be the great northern hub city, vibrant with hardworking people and a unique flavor of our cultural diversity. I'm focused on resetting, rebuilding, and rebounding. Rebounding our economy through infrastructure, innovation, education, and destination Anchorage, because we will be that jewel once again that people want to come, stay a little longer, and go a little further. I'm focused on resetting public safety, strengthening our police and community relations while we tackle things like graffiti vandalism and neglect on streets. No neighborhood should feel neglected. Every neighborhood should feel safe, and our families should be able to go out and enjoy all the amenities of our community. And I'm also focused on rebuilding our education. The most important pipeline that we can build in our city is the cradle, with investments in early childhood education, to career, making sure our graduates are graduating ready to work, to beyond, making sure that we're helping workers who are displaced find those jobs in the emerging economy. Thank you.
Next is Ms. Herndon.
Top three priorities is to end the mandate so that people can go back to work, go into construction immediately, find out what's been held up at the Planning Commission, push through veteran housing, and within the first 90 days, get a letter of intent to bring a financial district to downtown Anchorage. From there on, I intend to negotiate joint ventures to use our assets, our building, equipment, and our workforce for STEM field jobs, bringing skilled jobs to local Alaskans. That's my long-term goal, in addition to decreasing taxes by offsetting it as being an equity partner. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Falsey, you're up.
Well, thank you for the question. Top 3 priorities: championing the post-COVID economic recovery, making real progress on homelessness, and keeping the Port of Alaska reconstruction project on track. So what do you do on all of those 3? Well, championing the post-COVID economic recovery involves supporting additional jobs through smart infrastructure construction projects, making sure our permitting system is rapid and sensible, supporting the revitalization of downtown as we incentivize smart construction, make it a more walkable place with wayfinding signage and all the other ideas that have been bandied about, and making targeted investments that really help get the city on the move again. Comprehensively addressing homelessness. We have too many people falling into homelessness because we have inadequate mental health support. We have too many people in the green belts because our camp abatement is not connected to a rapid storage of private property, to a well-connected, adequately sized shelter system. We need an adequately sized shelter system and a post-Sullivan solution. And then we need those home for good, apartment style housing first investments. And on the port, we have to have the design in hand and a comprehensive plan of finance before the end of the year.
Thank you. Next is Mr. Bronson.
Thanks, Tani. We must do multiple things at once. First and foremost, we must end these mandates. We've got to get the city open so the entry-level jobs come back. That'll help both with the vagrancy and the homeless issue. And then we must deal with this vagrancy issue as a separate item from our overall homeless issue. We've got 150 to 250 vagrants living on our streets, misbehaving on their streets, and we need to take strong, firm measures to keep them safe, to keep them from freezing to death in the winter and getting hit by cars. And that's going to take strong measures. Third and not least, we need to deal with the crime issue in this town. No one is going to reinvest in downtown as they get on their computers and they look at pictures of Anchorage with boarded up hotels and boarded up downtown, caused in no small part because of this shutdown. So open the city and make it attractive to live in, and make it a great place to live, work, and play.
Thank you. Mr. Brown.
Yes, I think the 3 biggest issues are getting out of this COVID era, and also revitalizing the economy and dealing with the city budget and the R word, revenue. That's part of it. I think that we have to safely come out of COVID. I think to just suddenly open everything up and just invite more infections, look what's happening out in the valley. I think that's ludicrous. I think we need a good measured approach to using science and, quite frankly, good cognitive skills. I think from the viewpoint, or my second point, the economy, we need to work on developing new business and also on using the stimulus money for business and for people, and then transitioning into our new normal, which is no more revenue sharing from the state. The oil industry kind of sort of going down and going up and going down and going up. We know that eventually oil is going to go up, but those are my big 3, and I'll talk about that more.
Thank you. Mr. Swank.
Naturally, it's reopening, reopening the businesses up are the first. Secondly, is anything dealing with the economy, the immediate, and the number 1 immediate are the new federal grants coming in, plus whatever else is still hanging around. And then the other aspect, and then the homeless situation. But on the economy, going back to the economy, there's multiple parts there. So again, the federal grants, then it's development starting quickly in reference to looking at Title 21, the permitting section, everything else, the land use plan. The revisions have to be made to enable development to occur in the downtown area, and it has to be economically viable. such that people will want to both produce them and economically sell them. Anyway, and then on the homeless situation, well, and on the economics, we have the port project. Mr. Falsey stated the end of the year we'll have a plan. Currently, the port project has a 20-year history of disaster. It still is disaster. I totally.
Thank you, Mr. Swank. Just a reminder to keep an eye on our timekeeper, Meg, so that we can stay on schedule here tonight. And we'll end this question with Mr. Evans.
Thank you. It's all about the economy. We have to get our private sector economy going again. It's the answer to all of our questions. We don't solve any of our issues if we don't have a robust economy. And so the mayor has to focus on that. And it's important to understand that it's not about COVID. We had a declining economy well before COVID. We had businesses leaving this area. We've lost jobs before COVID. So it's not simply opening up the economy again and things are going to be a miracle cure. We have to fix the fundamental problems, and we have to have an administration that is pro-business and understands how to compete with cities around the country. In order to do that, you have to make Anchorage a livable city that cures its homeless problem and cures its crime problem. If you want people to invest in Anchorage, which we do, you have to solve those problems. That's the key. Fix the economy. And in order to do that, you have to fix the homeless problem and fix our crime problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Question number 2. Current zoning laws have created a cannabis corridor in Spenard and neighboring areas, with over 90% of cannabis licensees operating in Assembly Districts 3, 4, and 1. What are your solutions to remedying the issue of disproportionate cannabis licenses heavily concentrated in a few areas of town? We'll start this question with Ms. Herndon.
I'd like to get the public input on this before I make any decisions on different areas of town, and having a signage issue as well. So we have to talk about that more before I'll have any kind of opinion one way or the other. Thank you.
Mr. Bronson.
As president, if the locations are not problematic, and I've not heard anything to the contrary, we can leave things as they are. But like Heather just said, I agree. We need to get further input on, and this is a process. We legalized this several years ago, and it's like the alcohol industry. We need to tweak it as we go. But as I see right now, I've heard of no problems, and so I'm not going to change something that doesn't need to be changed.
Mr. Brown.
Well, I wasn't expecting this question, so I'm just going to answer it off the cuff, okay? I really think that, maybe this is something the alcohol board and marijuana board should have thought about before, number one. I think we should probably take input from all the local communities for certain. But, you can't give someone the right to do business somewhere and then just suddenly pull it out. I also think the free market is probably going to take care of this, because if you have too many marijuana stores in one place, they're all going to squeeze each other out until basically the best operation is left standing. I think that the way we limit our liquor licenses in Alaska and Anchorage really contributes to a situation where the free market can't work, and then you end up with liquor stores that are basically hub centers for lots of traffic, and you end up with situations where few are allowed to enter in terms of being able to do business. Thank you.
Mr. Robbins.
Thanks for the question. Well, the marijuana industry is very young. The marijuana retailing and growing industry, it's naturally going to go through some growing pains, as with any industry that we have. The only solution for having too many shops in one place and not enough shops in the other places, for us to work with the community councils and the people in the local neighborhoods, similar to how we allow liquor licenses and liquor stores There's a lot of regulations on the marijuana industry already. And some of them good, some of them bad. So I think what we need to do is, as the industry matures, we need to determine where those stores should be located. And we have to work with the local neighborhoods to determine, do they want marijuana shops in their neighborhoods or not? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Swank.
Oop. Huh. I won't. Have you got me locked there?
Yep, we can hear you. Your video is just still off.
Oh, okay. You want to start?
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, there we go. Anyway, the public is the number one, and public involvement. But what I was quickly going to say is the municipality has taken businesses away from people. I'll make that statement. It's been done illegally, and they've paid for it in court. And the assembly has done that with massive mistakes. Anyway, I just want to clarify that for Jeffrey. The other thing what I was going to say is the public needs to be involved. There's a lot of regulations. It will sort itself out. But back to that same legal issue, if the public, it's going to be a touchy issue in reference to that ownership issue and implications, and regulations may need to be revised both in reference to the marijuana regulations as well as municipal. But it's going to take time to sort it out with public involvement.
Mr. Evans.
Thank you. I was on the assembly when the marijuana ballot initiative passed, and we had to come up with all the regulations that control the industry. One of the things the assembly did back then was to ensure that the municipality had equal control with the state with respect to licensing of marijuana facilities. We were concerned about, the unknown effects of this new industry. So we do have, as a municipality, the ability to control licenses that we issue and other items like that. So we have the ability to look at the geographic disbursement of these businesses. And if it becomes a problem, or if it's being concentrated in an area and that becomes problematic, the assembly does have the ability to regulate that by ensuring that no new licenses go in certain areas. So it's an issue that we can control. I don't know that right now it is a problem. I certainly believe that it's something that should be considered and looked at, but we do have the control to affect changes to that if we need to.
Mr. Falsey.
Well, thank you for the question. This is not an issue that I have studied in depth. As municipal manager, I oversaw 9 departments, 3 utilities, 2 enterprises, and 4 offices, but I didn't have planning or development services. But I do know a little bit about how this situation arose. One factor is just that in any sort of market economy, like businesses do cluster. Home Depot ends up near Lowe's, Qdoba ends up near Subway. But the particular thing that happened here was the assembly was interested in making sure that marijuana businesses were not too close to other protected uses. And that didn't leave. A lot of areas of town left. So you did find an exacerbated clustering. But what the observation from a lot of the portions of the community has been is that the marijuana businesses that moved in actually revitalized some areas. There were some really poor buildings that got significantly upgraded. So there are things you can do. You could change the licenses. You could look at density requirements. You could have a separation distance from one marijuana store to another. But I'd want to really be convinced that there is a problem to solve here before jumping in with additional regulations.
Thank you. Mr. Westfall.
Okay. The cannabis corridor is probably not much different than the alcohol, beer, and wine corridor. You have those things in cities. There was migration there, based on how many schools are available in the area, so if you are not restricted by a school, then there's a tendency to locate your business where there's a popular venue. Generally speaking, the competitive nature of those kind of businesses will pretty much limit their existence. They will tend to buy each other out, force each other out. it's competitive. I think competition will eventually solve the problem. I'm good.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Meg.
Mr. Dunbar, you're up.
Well, thank you, Tani. And I have to say, I think this is the question out of all the forums, maybe has the most unanimity among the candidates, except with the possible exception of Mr. Swank. But people have said, how this came about. The assembly created a system of protected uses and distances from them that limited where the marijuana shops could go. And so that's where they went. And as Mr. Falsey stated, certainly on my side of town and some other places where we've been regulating them, they have gone in and fixed up buildings. They've also installed a lot of security cameras. So there have been cases where the Anchorage Police Department has actually relied on security camera footage from marijuana shops to solve crimes that are in the nearby area. I personally don't believe I would support a system that artificially restricted the number or created a medallion system or anything like that, where the licenses could be bid on and the price would go much higher. I think that the system we have now is generally working pretty well. But of course, as was said earlier, it is a young industry. And if we see problems develop, of course, we can go in and fix it within the structure that the state has also given us.
And finally, Mr. Martinez.
All right, thank you for the question and the opportunity to speak on this. I think it's important just to remind us with respect to that every neighborhood is different, has different characters, and different corridors, and we're really being responsive to community is critical. So I think that from a leadership perspective, you want to listen. Obviously, we've heard why and how things have been cited now, but being responsive to the shifting nature of the calls from community is critical as well. I do believe that from a planning perspective, making sure that we don't have disproportionality, whether it's this industry or whether it are other industries, just overburdening communities, especially if they feel that way. So that's not what I believe is the current situation. I believe that people are acting in good faith, and there are businesses that want to be good neighbors, and they're providing, cleaning up areas around themselves and being connected to communities. I know community councils do have some ability to speak into what happens, but responsiveness to neighborhood character is critical.
Thank you. For question 3, throughout Anchorage, we see a high number of deadly collisions on our roadway, especially for pedestrians. What are 3 things you will do to make Anchorage a safer, more livable city when it comes to multimodal transportation, including for people on foot, on bikes, in buses, and in cars? We will start this question, Mr. Westville.
Okay, I'm live. Yeah, I'm very much a bicycle addict. So, and I've had several close encounters that I did not like. And I believe that people are in a hurry. So many people speed in this city and nobody wants to slow down. And if you look and see, you're driving along, and if you do the speed limit, you are going to get passed on the road. So it is one of the most rude cities for vehicle drivers that I've seen. What can you do about it? Enforce the law. Use the police to enforce the law. We have plenty of police. We hired a bunch of them. They need to enforce the law. And with that, I'll turn it over. Thanks, Meg.
Thank you. Next to answer will be Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you. And again, I find myself agreeing with Mr. Westfall on a lot of what he just said. And 3 specific things to try to prevent harm to pedestrians and bicyclists. I would say 1, improving connectivity on our trails so that we can have people on their bikes or on foot using our trails without ever interacting with traffic. But second, as Mr. Westfall mentioned, we do have excessive speeds on a number of roads, and some of our roads were not thoughtfully constructed, and they need to be reconstructed in a way that reduces excessive speeds and promotes traffic calming. And then third, speaking about public transit, we need to continue to invest in public transit and also invest in affordable housing, dense housing, and multi-use housing along our public transit corridors. Last thing, I know we asked for 3, but the 4th thing I'll say is snow removal. Because you can have public transit, but if people have to walk along the road to get to that bus or to get to that trail because the sidewalks are totally snowed in, then they don't have a true safe route.
Thank you. Mr. Martinez, you're up.
All right, all right. So yes, connected, safe, and thriving is part of my vision for the city. And with respect to making sure that trails, bike paths, and neighborhoods are connected, that's critical. I also believe in really, when I talk about investments in infrastructure, I also am looking at public transportation. We have to really grow a robust public transportation network that not only helps to get people into safe travel, cars off the road, but helps to connect families and working individuals who are in parts of town that require public transportation for their economic survivability. And I've worked with, when my former job as a special assistant to the mayor of Anchorage, I helped to bring creative signage and traffic calming mechanisms through placemaking with the Alaska Injury Prevention Center. I would continue to bring the community into a robust, creative, educational, and public awareness campaign. And lastly, sidewalks are important to me, and I would want to make sure that we're focusing on improving sidewalk conditions.
Thank you. Next will be Miss Herndon.
Thank you. We have improved sidewalk conditions. I could tell you that from my perspective of where my house sits, the sidewalks have been kept clear with a little bit of a snow berm as a barrier from the street. But it's around Midtown, Old Sears Mall, and Fred Meyer's and Barnes and Noble, where these incidents have happened of people getting run down by a vehicle. There's several cities that have already dealt with this issue before, and I think we need to look at their legislation and pass similar legislation that protects pedestrians in our town. Certainly, it's not at all acceptable that somebody should hit a person over by Fred Meyer's and then peel their body off of their truck and leave it by the road. This is not acceptable at all. So I seek harsher penalties for people who are speeding through that area of town, most definitely. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Mr. Bronson.
Thanks, Tony. I find myself agreeing with both Mr. Dunbar and Mr. Westfall. We do need to do some improvement here. We need to clear our sidewalks so that folks don't have to walk on the shoulder and fall into traffic, certainly in the wintertime. And overall, we need to just deconflict foot traffic, bike traffic with high-speed vehicle traffic. That's going to be essential. But first and foremost, I think we have to deal with the vagrants issue, because far too many of these people that are getting killed on these streets are vagrants who are enticed to come to the streets, beg for money or handouts, and that process simply has to end. So again, the vagrancy issue touches back on pedestrian safety, and that needs to be dealt with. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Brown.
Yes, I think the solutions are manyfold. I can't even count how many times I've had to come almost to a complete stop on a 45-mile-an-hour road because someone walks in front of me and seemingly not to care. And obviously under the influence of alcohol and drugs. This happens all too often. I think, as I said, this is all a multifaceted problem. We also have the problem with people getting hit on bikes. Yes, we do need to find ways to separate the bike traffic from the cars. Yes, we need more community service patrol and mental health, community mental health workers and mental health policing to keep those chronic inebriates out of the streets. I think we also need road and infrastructure improvements to include more drive-through roads that we're not having to stop on all the time and that can maintain high levels of high-speed traffic. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Robbins.
Thank you very much. So the question was, what 3 things can we do to improve basically interaction between the different modes of transportation in Anchorage? And I think that short term, one of the things that we could do, first of all, is we need to be constantly evaluating our public transit routes and our ridership numbers to make sure that we're delivering rides and offering rides in the areas where we need it. The second thing that we can do is we can also look to evaluate the types of vehicles that we're using for our public transportation system. Maybe there's an opportunity for us to have more routes with smaller vehicles. The third thing that we need to do is, and that's one of the things we talk about, these are short-term solutions to the long-term problem. We need to connect our 2 freeways so that we can eliminate truck traffic and eliminate the number of cars on our road by connecting and building the north-south bypass. Thank you.
Mr. Swank.
First of all, I have to quickly give a honorarium to a man by the name of Robert Kniefel, Bob Kniefel. Bob Kniefel was brought from Seattle to Anchorage and the greater Anchorage area borough, created the traffic department. He brought the federal bus system. He did it all. So I'll stop right there. He's a phenomenal guy. And he also went to work for the MOA. Anyway, the MOA has a traffic department, plain and simple. The MOA has a roads group, and we have a maintenance group. And we also have a subdivision agreement for the development of new subdivisions, whether they're commercial or residential. All of this intertwines, and it's all part of the traffic and has to intertwine with the rest of the departments so that the biking and pedestrian improvement are unified in that system. The planning, it's a planning system. The city has been very good at it, actually. But now, like I say, with maintenance, with new, that's when you take the opportunity, 1, and 2, with the new development agreements. They pay for part of it. And I'll stop right there.
Thank you. Mr. Evans, you're up.
Thank you. I think, we have to recognize that we need to make Anchorage safer as far as all of our pedestrian traffic. The one thing we can do is we have to get a lot of bicycles off the road, use our trail system. We have increased connectivity with the trail system, but in order to do that, we have to make our trails and our parks safer. Right now, a lot of people don't want to be on them for a number of reasons. We got a lot of homeless issues in the trails to keep people off that. The second thing is, a lot of people mentioned we have to do a better job of snow removal on a lot of our sidewalks in the parts of the city that have sidewalks. That helps. But the main thing is, if you look at the numbers, it's a disproportionate number of homeless people that are the pedestrian victims in our accidents. We have to do a much better job of getting these people into shelter, off the roads, off the streets where they are causing harm to themselves. We have to be more compassionate. We have to find solutions to this problem. And if we do that, we will reduce the numbers.
Thank you. And finally, Mr. Falsey.
Well, thank you for the question. The bike and pedestrian accidents have actually been going down over the last few years, which is good news. So we can continue to push in a lot of directions. And every one of those is an individual tragedy, though. So we're trying to drive towards zero. So 3 things. You can change the physical environment of our roads. You can make better alternative to the roads. And last, you can up enforcement. On changing the built environment, we are already pushing towards the Vision Zero initiatives, where we're doing things like complete streets programs, like Northern Spenard Rebuild, that equally prioritize the safety of cars and of pedestrians and bicycles. Next, the AMAPS process. All the federal money that we are pushing can't just be used for mega projects. So we should really be looking at reducing the total vehicle miles traveled in Anchorage as a whole. And of course, upping the snowplow game so that it's easier to stay on the sidewalks. On alternatives, you've heard about more trail connections, better bus improvements. And last, on enforcement, if you look at the 2019 annual traffic report, you'll see some of those collisions, which are the driver who's turning right and smashes into the bicyclist because they're looking left for oncoming traffic. But there's a lot of just distracted driving, and that's part of why we upped the police officers by 100 over the last several years.
Thank you, candidates, for your responses. Next, we will move on to question 4. As we are adjacent to the Ted Stevens Anchorage International Airport, West Anchorage community councils have advocated over the years to mitigate the impacts of airport development and operations on our surrounding neighborhoods, parks, and natural areas. Impacts which include air and noise pollution, loss of wildlife habitat, and increased airport car and truck traffic through our neighborhoods. We acknowledge the airport's economic importance, but with more high-impact cargo development currently in the works at the airport, how will you work with community councils to ensure the long-term protection of our health, safety, and quality of life in West Anchorage? First up will be Mr. Robbins.
So I spent a lot of time in West Anchorage when I was a kid. And I think that the only way to ensure that our neighborhoods in West Anchorage feel safe and feel like they have a voice is to continue the extensive process that the airport goes through now in making sure that they're connected to all of the community councils in the neighborhood. They're very good at communicating the things that they have planned and engaging with the community councils and taking feedback. So as mayor, I'll continue that tradition. I'll continue that tradition of collaboration. The airport is vital to our growth as a city. And yes, there may be some growing pains as that moves forward, but I'm confident based on my time I've spent with the new manager out at the airport and with his staff, that they are very, very committed to engaging with the community to make sure that not only does the community approve of the growth, but they're happy with the result.
Thank you, Mr. Robbins. Next will be Mr. Swank.
The airport has an excellent noise program. I used to be the chief engineer at Anchorage International. The airlines, it's a mixture of the airport staff, the airlines, there will always be issues. Now, but the other thing that also comes to interplay is the fact that the all newer aircraft are less and less noisy. So it's not going to get worse. Even with additional aircraft, this is an industry standard. It's growing dramatically in that way. And it also relates to fuel, the most expensive element, which is fuel consumption, everything else. But anyway, the communication between, as long as it maintains and it's there, it always has been, it works itself out. There is never a perfect solution. Again, the airport's there, people bought there, but they do everything humanly and financially possible. And I'll kind of stop right there.
Thank you, Mr. Swank. Mr. Evans, you're up.
Thanks. It's an excellent question because I think it typifies the type of issues that governments face all the time. Because the Ted Stevens Airport is a huge economic driver for our city. It's very important. We have to, and it's penned in by land all around it. It doesn't have much room to expand. It's not at a great distance from our city like some airports can be. But it is a problem for those who live in close proximity to it. So the whole issue always becomes one of balance. And we achieve balance by making sure that we do have processes that allow the communities that are impacted by the airport to get their input in. And we do everything we can to mitigate anything we can mitigate within reason to the airport. But it is an issue that is always going to be a bit of friction And we just have to work on that and understand the balance.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Next will be Mr. Falsey.
Well, thank you. I definitely appreciate the question. I think you'll get unanimity that the airport is a real massive economic driver for Anchorage and part of our long-term sustainable economy, taking advantage of our comparative advantage of a place on the globe as a logistics hub. But I know, as a West Anchorage resident myself, this is a long time issue of concern. I mean, so much of the West Anchorage District Plan from July 2012 is about what happens in the future of the airport. And right now there are growth plans. And I think some of the plans that happen on Postmark Drive near FedEx are less of concern. The Peony Farm is less of a concern, but the expansion near Coulis on Raspberry, granted, it's a lot of concern. So what can you do about that? One is, I think, but I don't know, I'd want to confirm, a lot of those are going to trigger federal NEPA kind of requirements. So you really get the community's concerns aired. They have to do a noise study. They have to do a smells, odors study. The next is you lean on the airport to do the right thing by the community, to have vegetative buffers, to have protective berms. And then last, you really make sure that they're protecting our assets so that we're not destroying the coastal trail through airport expansions. And all of that can be a community conversation with the airport manager and others.
Thank you. Mr. Westfall, you're up next.
Well, the airport's not going to move. And for every appearance, we're going to increase volume out there on both air travel and road travel to support the airport. So what are we going to do? That's an interesting question. That is going to take quite a bit of investigation and logic to deal with that issue. I don't think it's going to get better in the short run. I think it's going to get worse. So how do we re-educate to be able to accept it? Very good question. I like that question. Oh, and before the end of our current presidency, all the airplanes will be electric because of the Green New Deal. So we won't have to worry about the noise. Thanks, Meg. I'm done.
I'm on mute. Next will be Mr. Bronson.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I earned my living out at Ted Stevens International for 18 years, flying mostly 740s, FACS exclusively 747s. Mr. Swank is absolutely right. The new technology engines, as they get more and more advanced, and we go to the high bypass fan engines, they get quieter and quieter, even as they get more efficient, and that's a good thing. I think we want more air traffic at Anchorage International, and as long as the procedures that the flight crews are following are adhered to, and they are, we can mitigate this to the degree that we can. You know, there's reduced thrust takeoffs, that helps. First and foremost, the thing that we need to trust in is that we keep the departures on 3-3, we keep the arrivals on 7 right, 7 left. And that makes a big difference for the noise. As far as the truck and vehicle traffic, that's a planning issue that I'm not familiar with, but certainly needs to be worked on.
Thank you, Mr. Bronson. Next will be Mr. Dunbar.
Well, thank you, Tani. And you know, navigating the relationship between the airport and the residents of West Anchorage is absolutely crucial. And the mayor's office should try to play a positive role whenever possible. And you know, in preparation for this forum and even your questionnaire, I got a chance to read and refresh on the West Anchorage District Plan. It is remarkable how often the airport is discussed. I mean, 2 full subsections present in almost every section, and it makes sense because it is the single largest entity in West Anchorage. It's clear, though, that communication is the key. The state and federal law prevents a lot of direct regulation of the airport, but there are some priorities that the municipality should have. We should obviously protect the coastal trail. We should protect recreation access. We should look for opportunities to purchase parcels and do land swaps whenever possible, as happened with Warrens-Off Park, to try to get things in a permanent status where we can protect them. And then again, communication between the neighbors, people moving in and people who've been there a long time in the airport, working with the administration of the airport, connecting them to the community councils, and make sure that they are doing right by the neighborhoods.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Next will be Mr. Martinez.
All right, great question, and thank you. Yeah, the airport is critical. We've heard it, and let's talk about how critical it is. With the new investments in cold storage facility and the investments that we expect to come down in the future, we're also going to look at road traffic, as we heard, but it's because we're going to be a full service hub. The city and potential light manufacturing and value added processing begins to take shape in terms of new industries and economic growth and expansion. So we do expect that. But the first and foremost thing is, I've mentioned before, responsiveness to the community, responsiveness to community councils, working with community councils, in strengthening that relationship, both with the airport management, but also with the state, so that we all really are focused on the bigger picture together. Those lines of communication are open. We can disagree with dignity, but still be able to move forward and recognize the critical importance of the airport. I also will note that Anchorage has probably the third or fourth busiest airspace in the nation, with 4 airports overlapping jurisdictions, including Ted Stevens International.
Thank you. Ms. Herndon, you're next.
I have to leave now. So this is Al Swank. I'm going to go ahead and leave at this point, if you hear me.
Yes, thank you,
Okay.
Mr. Swank.
And this is
Thank you.
Dave Bronson. I have to get across town myself. So thank you very much, West Anchorage. Really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for
If anybody
letting
else,
us-
I'm also going to leave in a few minutes. So my response is, I agree with Mr. Swank and Mr. Bronson. This airline is well regulated, and there will be new technology to decrease the noise. I live by Merrill Field, and of course Elmendorf. So we have air noise all the time. We just over the last 5 decades, we've just kind of gotten used to it. But I know that there's new technology, and certainly with the noise, it should always be open to public opinion. The public has the right to voice their concerns and to make their concerns known. And that's my answer. I appreciate being here tonight. Thank you very much.
This is Joe. I've got to take off and attend another meeting. I appreciate you listening to my drivel. So I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Okay. Next will be Mr. Brown. If you're still with us.
Hey, thank you for the question. I, first of all, think that all the community councils around the airport should definitely have an input. I think that a lot of the operations that occur out at the airport involve federal law and state oversight. So, you know, from the perspective of an Anchorage mayor, I would do everything I could. I would also like to promote and support, you know, the concept of growing a very, very comprehensive infrastructure. I find it really strange that International Airport Road goes west and then terminates at the New Seward Highway. I mean, what an amazing opportunity to move cargo. Also, you could stage things that come on and off planes in and out of Alaska by having low-speed rail. We already have rail out there for passengers. Why not use it to stage things off to the port? Also, control the roads coming in and out so that you have commercial lanes the way big cities do. And then along with my ideas for the port and
All right, just a quick note for our audience members. All candidates were given notice with the proper times and the length of this forum going until 8 o'clock. I'm not really sure what is going on, but we welcome the candidates who stayed, and we'll continue on with our question. And at this point, if you have to leave, maybe just put it in the chat and then head out so we're not interrupting our remaining speakers. So we are now at question 5. We've come halfway through, or a little over halfway through, with 3 questions left. This question says, in West Anchorage, many neighborhoods are built out in terms of housing, while other neighborhoods are experiencing residential areas being rezoned for other uses without replacing housing stock. Oh, I'm sorry. While other neighborhoods are experiencing residential areas being rezoned for other uses without replacing the housing stock. How would you describe challenges in our city's housing market, and how would you work to fix them as mayor? To start, we will hand this off to Mr. Robbins.
Great question. Affordable housing is a big issue for our city. Last year, I think we built 240 houses in Anchorage. The Valley built 540 houses. And there's multiple reasons for that. If we are going to see the resurgence of our housing industry here, first thing we need to do is we need to get control of and we need to reorganize and streamline our planning and permitting process. There's costs as much as up to $30,000 for a builder to build a home here in Anchorage that it doesn't cost out in the Valley. But secondly, we aren't really going to be able to deal with the housing crisis that we have here in Anchorage if we don't have more places to build. And that's why when I'm elected mayor, on day one, I'm going to reinstitute and restart the plans to build the Connect Bridge so that we can open up affordable space and open up space to build housing. We need more space, and that's the only solution to our housing trouble.
Thank you, Mr. Robbins. Next will be Mr. Brown.
Once again, thank you for the question. I think we need to look at how Anchorage deals programmatically and in terms of how we approve of our variances and approve of building permits. I think that the same Board of Commissioners that presides over a major development downtown shouldn't have to, that shouldn't have to be the process for someone who wants to put in a garage behind their house. 3 months and how many, permits and also the full review by the board, 34 copies of the drawings. I think it's too much. I also think that we need to increase density downtown. We may need to look at different plans for different parts of town instead of one broad code.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Next will be Mr. Evans.
Thanks. There's a number of things we have to do. First, we have to realize that it's a moving target. Back when I was on the assembly, and it was only like 5 years ago, we were talking about Anchorage having a steadily growing population and the amount of homes we had to build in order to keep up with that. Well, the last 5 years, we've had a declining population, and we have to adjust our figures accordingly. But we also do have to eliminate the bureaucratic friction that exists in the Planning and Zoning Commission. And in order to do that, you have to understand it. You have to understand how government works. And frankly, you have to have some understanding of labor relations. And that's why I think my background as an employment lawyer would be very helpful in actually finally fixing that problem. We also have to disregard some of the solutions that aren't really going to help. Building a bridge across Kinnick Arm, while may be a good idea in the long run, is not helpful for our housing problem because the places on the other side of the bridge are not in Anchorage. If anything, it relieves the pressure and relieves the incentive for people to reinvest in homes in Anchorage. You have to be very careful about a solution like that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Next will be Mr. Falsey.
Thank you for the question. I think as folks look to characterize housing in Anchorage, there's pretty broad spread agreement that a lot of our housing stock has now become quite old and that there are ongoing concerns about affordability and quality. And if you look at the Anchorage Chamber, who does the business survey every year, the character and affordability of our housing stock always ranks high on a business impediment list. And so what do you do about that? Well, I think we do have to figure out a way to incentivize densification and redevelopment. And some of that means looking more at these town square models that we're doing in planning. There's the Creekside example over on the east side. It doesn't mean throwing away the comprehensive plan and saying we're just gonna have sprawl everywhere and that, now the sky is the limit. But it does mean, I think, doing some new things. The legislature in 2017 newly invited municipalities in the Senate Bill 100 process to incentivize activities that grow the tax base. And the first ordinances that came out of that were two that I wrote, one to incentivize housing downtown and one to incentivize affordable and workforce housing on transit lines. We're also looking at new ways to finance and fund utility extensions. Those are the kinds of solutions we need to look at.
Thank you, Mr. Falsey. Next is Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Tani. And affordable housing and improving our housing stock will absolutely be a priority of my administration. And I've served as the Assembly representative to the AEDC's Live, Work, Play Housing Subcommittee and also the Chamber of Commerce. And they speak very often about these kind of issues. If we want to attract and retain families, we need to offer better, more affordable housing. It is going to be more of the infill variety. Most of our easily buildable land has been used up. And so we have to look for multi-use development. We need to follow our plans that do call for upzones in some cases and increase density. And we need to also, when we're doing rezones, look to preserve the number of housing units. We just recently did a rezone in Spenard along Benson that did exactly that. I was the champion, one of the champions for the accessory dwelling unit ordinance. That's one of the creative ways, what's called mother-in-law apartments. It's one of the creative ways to improve our housing stock. And then we have done past tax abatements downtown. I think looking for other creative ways to use tax abatement to spur affordable housing is another means to go forward.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. And finally, Mr. Martinez.
All right, last but not least, affordable housing is critical in any community, especially when we're talking about driving new industries and making sure that we talk about mixed use and mixed affordability as well. The things that I've focused on are immediately beginning to reorganize the Office of Economic and Community Development to get a handle on streamlining through the permitting process. I want us to get to yes sooner. I want us to get to shovel ready faster. I also believe that we can do things specifically targeting different areas. Anchorage doesn't have it should not have a one size fit all model. The challenges of land and housing out in Girdwood are different than East Downtown. So I believe that we have to have real plans depending on neighborhood impact. But let me put another piece in here, not only incentives and tax abatements, but I want to talk about density housing and activating federal opportunity zones, specifically the East Downtown corridor from C to Gamble, and bringing that part up as really that growth of downtown mixed use and affordable housing with senior accessibility, lower levels and wider entrances.
Thank you so much for your responses. Next, we're moving to question 6. Over 9,500 Anchorage residents and families experienced homelessness last year for a variety of reasons, including economic insecurity, unstable or seasonal employment, high rent cost, behavioral health issues, intergenerational trauma, and/or impacts of colonialism. What specific policies would you enact to address these root causes of homelessness in our city? We'll start this question with Mr. Dunbar.
Well, thank you, Tani. And we've had entire debates on this topic, so I'll try to fit as much as I can into a minute. But we know it's of crucial importance to Anchorage. Right now, we have a situation down at the mass shelter, the Sullivan Mass Shelter, that needs to be resolved by the new mayor because the FEMA funds are going to run out probably by the end of September. But we learned some things down there. It's one of the few silver linings of the pandemic. There's an on-site resource hub that quickly connects people experiencing homelessness to treatment, to employment, and to housing. And that's a new model that needs to be used going forward. And we have some private partners that have now stepped up to try to create that kind of resource hub down in the old Beans Cafe property. Of course, we've got some other new sources of funds. There are about $7 or $8 million of new HUD funds that are coming in. There's the alcohol tax revenue, and then there's these additional private funds. But the key has to be housing. That is, we're moving people. Shelter isn't the end of the line. We are moving people quickly out of shelter into treatment, into housing. I think we can all agree that the situation pre-pandemic down at 3rd and Carlick was unacceptable, and we're not going to go back to that. We are going to move people into transitional, permanent supportive, and other kinds of housing. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Martinez, you're up.
Thank you. First, we should not be talking about criminalizing the unhoused community. Secondly, I thank you for your question, and I really just want to highlight that you mentioned colonialism as one of the factors, and I think that's important just on its face and a value-based perspective. People find, and what we do find is that there's a difference between the visible homelessness that we see out in the streets and then what you described as the sheer number of people that face housing challenges. And so I've recognized those differences, and we really want to make sure we're focused on prevention. both immediately rapid rehousing, but the long-term strategy. We know that investments in education matter. We know that economic growth matters. We know that helping families have strong jobs and employment opportunities matters to help keeping people in safe, secure housing. On my website, george2021.com, I do have a rapid response plan for how we deal with our current crises. But I also just want to recognize that I do not believe in warehousing. I don't want to see 200-bed facilities. I believe in rapid, small, scattered site models with high accountability. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martinez. Up next will be Mr. Brown.
Thank you. I'm glad you brought up the term the root causes, because, you know, I think the one thing we can't do is we can't deny the fact that the causes of homelessness are generational, and they come from a destruction of culture for so many persons. It is a deep cultural destruction that's occurred. There is a cultural trauma that has occurred, and these people are at the bottom of society now. And we can't say it's all because they made bad choices. It's also because maybe they haven't received education and because their parents were addicts or had domestic violence issues. But I think that's the question. But I'll move on to the homeless situation overall. I do think the hub-based system's really good. I think we need more services for that. I do think we need a transitional congregate facility for people to come and go, the people who don't want to be in the more controlled environments.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Next will be Mr. Robbins.
Thank you very much. I think that the easiest and the I shouldn't use the word easy and homeless in the same sentence. I think that the most important thing that we can do to address the root causes of the homelessness that we're experiencing in our community right now is to get the economy restarted, get our businesses working, and give security to those at the economic level that are living paycheck to paycheck, because those are the ones that are going to be forced into the homeless system if we don't get our economy moving. The second thing we need to do is we need to increase the number of mental health facilities, because many of the homeless are veterans, and many of the veterans have issues from their service to our country, and we need to help them. And the only way we can help them is to have more mental health facilities here that can provide long-term care. And we also need to address the number of people that are flowing into the system. And the only way we can do that is to A, get the economy started, and to B, try to get the nonprofits that are working on this system now to stop operating in silos and work together.
Thank you, Mr. Robbins. Next will be Mr. Evans.
Thank you. It's an important question. And I think the first thing we have to realize is when we talk about the homelessness and the problem of homelessness, we are doing a disservice to the issue by lumping it all under one roof called homelessness. There are so many reasons why people end up in an unsheltered situation that it causes problems in how we respond to it by just calling it homelessness. The other thing we have to realize is the city of Anchorage has to own this problem. Right now, we provide no money for shelter. We use pass-through funds from CARES and FEMA to fund the Sullivan Arena and other hotels. We do not take responsibility for solving this problem, and we have to. The problem is not going to be solved unless Anchorage steps up to the plate and says, this is our problem, and we as a community are going to solve this. And that takes resources. It doesn't get solved by waving a magic wand and hoping it goes away or making nonprofits work together somehow. Thank you.
Thank you. Next will be Mr. Falsey.
Well, thank you. I described in my earlier answer about the top priorities, how I see too many people going into homelessness, too many unsheltered homeless, an inadequate shelter system, and not enough housing first investments. You've asked about the first piece of that. What do you do about the root causes? Too many people falling into homelessness. And I think you've got the list right. On the economy side, that we have 200 more people in the shelter census right now than we have ever had in years past. There's always been a stable sinusoid, but now we're 200 higher than we've ever been. That's the COVID problem. And so you've got to recover the economy, and you've got to get the federal dollars out quickly. Second, you mentioned the high rents. That's why we have such a high emphasis on maximizing our affordable housing offerings. Behavioral health, that has traditionally been a state responsibility, but we've had no movement on it for years. And it's reached the point where if the state's not going to do it, the city has to. And that's why we're involved in the substance misuse treatment facility at the Golden Lion. And then last, you mentioned the equity issues, the intergenerational trauma and colonialism. There, I think the best you can do is to have a culturally appropriate, well-functioning shelter system and better partnership with the state to have a more functioning state system that starts to address some of those issues.
Thank you, Mr. Falsey. And Mr. Westfall, did you see the question in the chat box, or would you like me to reread it for you?
I did. So
Okay,
and I
you're
think
up.
I can answer it. There is a certain amount of the homeless issue that is completely unsolvable by a government, like the city of Anchorage, the municipality of Anchorage. There's kind of three classes of homeless: the ones that lost their jobs and fell into ruin because of the COVID situation and the restriction on their ability to make a living. Those are the ones that should be concentrated on to put the effort in to make sure that those people get out of the homeless situation first, and the government should help that first. Second is the ones that, well, let's just jump to the third. There's a certain group that are never going to recover ever, and they're just going to be codependent forever. Those, if they have something that they're making, like a shareholder or they're a VA person, then we need to get that entity involved and take some responsibility for them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Westfall. Moving on to question 7. This is a two-part question. With a changeover in the Anchorage Police Department leadership, what qualifications will you look for in a new police chief? What priorities should be set for law enforcement? We'll start this question hearing from Mr. Martinez.
All right, thank you for the question. I work closely with APD and have for many years now at this point, and I'm a founding advisory board member of Anchorage Cops for Community. What I do know is that I am also the only candidate that has experienced racially motivated stop and frisk as a young person in another city. So I want to first highlight, we do a really good job here, and I want to celebrate our law enforcement. That spirit of wanting to improve, the spirit of wanting to be transparent, the spirit of wanting to deepen the relationship between community and law enforcement is exactly the value that I want to see in our next chief, continuing that. I also know there are equity challenges that I want us to begin to approach as we develop recruitment pipelines so that we have our law enforcement, our fire department, and our municipal workforce reflect the cultural and otherwise diversity of our city. So I'm focused on strengthening police community relations and shortening the distance between our young people and potential careers in law enforcement.
Thank you, Mr. Martinez. Next, we'll hear from Mr. Brown.
Yes, the qualities, could you repeat the question?
Yes. With a changeover in Anchorage Police Department leadership, what qualifications will you look for in a new police chief? Also, what priorities should be set for law enforcement?
Okay, qualities I look for in a new police chief. I would like to see a police chief who had a fair amount of time on the beat, worked his way up through the department, has management experience, is very serious about modern policing and attitudes toward criminality, and is a true peace officer who sees his role as a peace officer before he sees he or she, or he or she sees themselves as a true professional in being a peace officer. Then the second aspect of the question is, what changes would I like to see in policing? Well, I would like to see body cameras, and I would like to see very much transparency and openness. I think the Anchorage Police Department has a good reputation, generally speaking, and I would like to continue to support them. I would like to make sure that they are getting everything they need. Yeah, that's where I am.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Next, we'll hear from Mr. Robbins.
Thank you very much. So I think the chief of police is one of the most important executive positions in the city. I think that who we pick for that job is going to determine how our streets are, how safe our streets are. And so the leadership or the skills I'm looking for in the new chief is I'm looking for somebody who has leadership skills. I'm looking for somebody who has experience and on the job. I'd like to find somebody from within the department and promote them. Somebody who has the skills to execute, somebody who has a track record, somebody who also has compassion so that he can understand what's happening not only in the community, but also within the department. And then someone who possesses the communication skills to be able to clearly communicate the vision of the department, not only to the rank and file members and his sub-level or his managers and lieutenants, but also to the community, so that we can take and we can return to, we can increase the morale at the police department and also create safer streets, because the number one thing we expect from our police is to create safe streets and to make us all feel safe. And then also we need to make sure that we would focus on resource management and make sure that we're properly applying those resources.
Thank you, Mr. Robbins. Next, we'll hear from Mr. Evans.
Thank you. Yeah, I spent 6 years of my life as a police officer. I think I understand life from that perspective somewhat. And I have a good relationship with the current APD. I'm one of a group of lawyers that get called out whenever there is an officer involved shooting to represent their officers. So I've worked closely with APD for a number of years. I think the key thing in looking for the new chief is someone who understands how the role of police have changed in the 21st century. Since the 1980s, we've militarized our police in response to what was happening on the street. And it's created a divide between the community and the police as far as how his force is used. We need a leader on the police department who understands that community service and representing the community is equally important to the job of law enforcement. And we're faced with a crime problem. We have to find someone who understands that and can get the crime rate down at the same time. And I believe we can do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Next will be Mr. Falsey.
Well, thank you. I think first and foremost, you look for a police chief who is philosophically aligned with the community policing model, who really does believe that the department works best when the police officers are community guardians and not warriors, where protect and serve is a real thing, because public safety floats on community trust. And so the police chief will have to be able to really hear concerns about how the department is really functioning, be responsive to those concerns, be very transparent, and then beyond, do the job well. So the police department is the largest department in the municipality. They have 435 sworn officers. The total department size is 600 people. And we have been making progress. Crime has been steadily declining. And that's because not just more, but also smarter. We've been focused on better criminal intelligence, better customer service. We've turned on 311. We outquit officers with cell phones. We gave them better DNA crime analysis capabilities and expanded the lab offerings. The police chief has to be able to do the job while also maintaining the trust with the community.
Thank you, Mr. Falsey. And now we'll hear from Mr. Westfall.
All right. So my experience working with APD was working with Ted Smith to help train some machine gunners for the SWAT team, and also with the Alaska Mountain Rescue Group when we would have trouble, when we would wind up trying to find somebody. Other than that, I think when we're looking at a police chief, we need to be concerned about the type of person who is most experienced in fighting crime and directing the forces to fight crime against people and property. And another big issue is traffic safety. I would rather see a lot more radar guns bought and a lot more cars sitting at intersections than I would in body cameras. I think somehow society has gone a little crazy on this body camera thing. So go ahead, I'm done.
Thank you. And finally, Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Tani. First and foremost, I'd be looking for a police chief that has a real vision for the department and understands as was said earlier, the developments in modern policing. That's someone who can communicate and continue to build bridges with the community, who is transparent, and I think will implement ballot measure 4 should it pass, the body cam ordinance and the other new police technology. And you spoke also, your question also asked about what the priority should be for law enforcement. I think law enforcement should be focused, of course, on building that community protection, but also on violent crimes and on property crime, the thing that only they can do. Unfortunately, because of the alcohol tax, we've been able to fund a new mental health first responder program that will be housed in the fire department. So for people going through mental and behavioral health crisis, we'll have this new entity that will deploy that will take 7,000 calls out of the APD stack so that our officers can focus on the things that only they can do. And I'd be looking for a police chief that also believed in that vision and had an idea of how to integrate the operations of the police force and the new mental health first responder program.
Thank you so much. And now before we move on to our final question of the evening, just a quick note that there is going to be time to do closing statements. So we will make sure that's on the agenda. Question 8. Anchorage and the state as a whole is facing significant fiscal challenges. What specific strategies do you propose, including revenue generation and/or budget cuts, to attain a sustainable budget? We'll start this question from Mr. Brown.
Thank you so much for asking this question. Yay. I have a number of ideas for how to deal with these. Let's start with the budget. I think that a fairly aggressive and comprehensive budget analysis and an efficiency program should be started and maintained in the municipality to make sure we're getting the most out of our government for the least amount of money. I also think that we have to look for sources of new revenue now that we just don't have the state revenue sharing anymore and our oil industry is in decline and we're losing people in the city. I believe that the people who use large amounts of infrastructure in our city should have to pay a share of that cost, not just the property taxpayers. I believe that we need an online sales tax of some sort. I believe that we need to look over the wharfage fees at the port, and I believe that we need to really work on some sort of tariff or taxing structure with the new global operation at the airport and a few other things, but that's my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Next, we'll hear from Mr. Robbins.
Thank you very much. So there's only 2 ways to fix the budget crisis that we've got in our city, or what we've got going on. We either have to increase our revenue or decrease our expenses. It's very simple. So the decreasing of expenses is great, but you can only cut so far. I mean, we owe it to the citizens of the city to be able to provide certain services. So we have to look to revenue generating ideas. The only way we're going to be able to generate revenue is if we take a look at those sectors of our economies. First of all, we need to open the cities up. We need to get the city open so everybody can go back to work. But then secondly, we need to take a look at what sectors of the economy can we help recover the fastest. And the 2 sectors that we can help recover the fastest are tourism and hospitality. So one of the things that I will do specifically when I become mayor is I'm going to appoint a person to be the new economic development for tourism and hospitality. And we're going to move some other things over under the city manager position. The second thing we need to do is just we need to create more jobs. And to do that, we have to have vision. We're not going to just be able to think our way out of this or cut our way out of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Robbins. Next, we will pass it to Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Tani. Well, fiscal responsibility means that we reduce our over-reliance on property taxes, and also we reduce our dependence on the state. The good news is over the last 5 years, we've made some significant gains on both. We passed a fuel tax that went under the tax cap that directly offset property taxes. We sold MLMP, and we took the money and put it into a trust fund that will generate revenue for the foreseeable future. We did some small things too, like end the tobacco tax exception for certain vaping products, things like that. I think looking forward, this year we were at about inflation. We didn't significantly grow the budget. In the last several years, we've cut many departments except for public safety. I don't see a need for large new revenues, but if they were to come, it would probably come in one of two forms. Either a targeted sales tax that went to redevelopment, because a general sales tax doesn't seem to have the will of the people behind it, or a stormwater utility, which would go to fund drainage projects using a cost cause or cost payer model. And those revenues could offset the current way we do drainage projects, which is using property taxes through the bonds.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Next, we'll hear from Mr. Westfall.
There we go. Well, revenue is one of the first things we could do for revenue is get the city back open, because that would help get people back to work. It would generate the money that we need to pass around in the city, and it would get their people paying, their properties, their taxes and stuff like that. Second is tourism, of course. We need to figure out a way to get the tourism back in place, which would involve probably fighting Canada over it through the feds. And then as far as cuts go, the two most unpopular topics are going to be dealing with the Anchorage School District, because they're the biggest drain on the property tax, and a close look at how much of that money gets to the classroom versus how much of it is in overhead. And secondly, union contracts, and that's the same thing. How much of it gets to the public and how much of it's overhead. It's not going to be pretty. I'm done.
Thank you, Mr. Westfall. Next, we will have Mr. Martinez.
Relative to the state, the good news is Anchorage is stronger and more stable. And that's primarily because of, as the state shifted responsibilities, the municipality did step up. And we did do some things that protected our bond rating, secured our portfolio. You heard of these, a couple of things. The sale of MLMP was critical. But also, and the alcohol sales tax, new revenue, kind of that diversification of revenue is also important to maintaining our stability here in Anchorage. But growing our economy is critical. Bringing new industries here, opening businesses and keeping them here are important. Driving destination Anchorage so that people come, spend more money, stay a little longer, go a little further, and spread those dollars all around town, I think are important. And then lastly, I'll talk about shared service agreements, cooperative work agreements, and public-private partnerships to help reduce the burden or the reliance on local government, because we do have limited government, while we're able to bring in people to roll our sleeves up, work together, and maintain the certain services that we have to provide.
Thank you, Mr. Martinez. Next, we'll hear from Mr. Evans.
Thank you. There are times in every city when it becomes incumbent upon the citizens to step up. I think Anchorage is at that crossroads right now. We have a city that's been declining right before our eyes. I don't think it's a surprise to anybody. I think anybody that's been in Anchorage for a long time realizes that. And we have to realize that in order to turn this city around, we have to invest in ourselves. When I was on the assembly, I spent 6 months working with experts to come up with a sales tax that would relieve our all too reliance on property taxes. It would also give us the ability to invest in infrastructure needs voted by our citizens that would increase Anchorage's wherewithal. Oklahoma City did it. It turned its city around. We have to decide if we're willing to invest. Everybody wants to say, oh, we can do it in some other ways without increasing taxes. The reality is we need a sales tax, a broad-based sales tax, and the time is right for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. And finally, Mr. Falsey.
Well, thank you. I agree with much of what has been said. The state's fiscal situation is an absolute mess and very dire. But the good news is that the city has done very well to decouple itself to the maximum extent that it could over the last several years. We used to receive annually in the form of revenue sharing, more or less a blank check in the amount of tens of millions of dollars. That went down until last year it was less than 5 million. So we are largely now untethered to the state's fiscal situation when it comes to the provision of local services. We still get some pass-through grants, public health nurses, community childcare licensing, but for the most part, we shouldn't need additional revenues to continue to deliver core local services. And that's in part because of the way the MLMP deal was actually structured. The dividend that we'll receive off of that sale will grow incrementally over the next several years. But one of the most important things that the next mayor can do is help shine a light on the state's problems by flushing this conversation with better information so that people really understand the structural deficit that the state is in. Because if we fly the plane directly into the side of the mountain, that is not going to be good for Anchorage.
Thank you, Mr. Falsey. Now we will move into the final segment of the forum, closing statements. Due to the unprompted mini exodus from some of the candidates, response times have been increased to 1 minute each. So first up, we will hear from Mr. Mike Robbins.
Well, thank you. I hate to have anybody depart, but we're the benefactor of it, so I like that. You know, there are a lot of candidates running for mayor. A lot of us want to be your next mayor. And so it's kind of tough to choose. And to be totally honest, we have to be totally honest with ourselves, I think. And we have to look at the fact that many of these candidates have participated in our city's decline. And now they're asking you for 3 more years to fix what they broke. Their resumes are impressive and their accomplishments are impressive. Skyrocketing unemployment, higher taxes, increased homeless and rising crime. But as a small business person, I learned a long time ago that, you know, you could predict how a person's going to act by looking at what they've done in the past. So the question we need to ask ourselves is, what kind of Anchorage do we want? If you're happy with the direction of our city, the choice is very clear for you. If you're not, then I would like you ask that you elect me as your next mayor. I'll work tirelessly every day to ensure that we realize a vision of making Anchorage a safer, cleaner, and more prosperous city. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Robbins. Next, we'll have Mr. George Martinez.
Well, all right, everybody. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here with you all tonight. Thank you, West Anchorage. And thank you all of the community council members. Your voices matter. Community councils are vital. And in my administration, they will continue to be that way. My name is George Martinez, and I'm the independent choice for mayor of Anchorage because I recognize that the most important thing that the next mayor has to do is turn down the toxic partisanship and remind us of what it means to be able to roll our sleeves up, disagree with dignity, and work together. Economic development, public safety, and education as pillars of our community only are going to be successful when we recognize that we have to work together. You know, when a car's in the ditch in our city, I don't care if you're a Democrat, a Republican, what your identity is. All we want to know is if you have a tow rope and a shovel and can you help us get out? I'm the only candidate with diplomatic and executive experience in the mayor's office. And I invite you to visit my website at george2021.com to learn more about my plan to bring people together, roll our sleeves up, and move Anchorage forward. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Martinez. Next, we will hear from Mr. Jeffrey Brown.
All right. Thank you for letting me be here. You know, we have a lot of things to do, and a lot of people are saying, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this, and we're going to do this. You know what? When the rubber hits the road, it's got to be paid for. Okay? I'm here to stretch this debate. I'd love to be mayor. Then I'm going to tell you that I really believe that the property taxpayers in this city are the ones that are carrying the weight, and the renters that are renting from the property owners. It's all property tax, property tax, property tax. You can talk about your gas tax and your alcohol tax, and they pay for certain little slivers of things, but it's the property taxpayers that are paying the bills here. And we have to diversify our revenue sources. I've given a couple of really good, I think are really good ideas. I think we should incentivize people to spend their money locally. We create more economic units with the velocity of money. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Next, we'll hear from Mr. Joe Westfall.
I'm an independent. I'm registered as an independent, I'm sorry, as an undeclared. I've always been undeclared since I came to this state. So I don't associate either with Democrat or Republican. I don't say I'm this way or that way. What I am is open. I've always been open. My business has been that way. I have not had a problem staying in business since 1985 when I started my business. And I did it with logic. And I followed logic and I paid attention to who is important. And in this case, I believe the taxpayer is important, property taxpayer. And I believe that the community councils are important. And if you don't listen to those, and if you can't help the assembly come along with you to listen to what they need, you're a failure. That's it. I'm willing to give it a try.
Thank you, Mr. Westfall. Next, we'll hear from Mr. Bill Falsey.
Thank you. With all the candidates dropping off, I worried that we'd stumbled into an Agatha Christie novel, so I'm even more happy to make it to the final 7 here. My sense is that this election is about who is best prepared to meet the moment and deliver. A lot of candidates have a lot of good intentions. The question is who can translate those good intentions into on-the-ground solutions for the community. And outside of managing crises, I've shown that I can deliver. I quarterback the teams that got the MLMP sale done, that got the port project off of High Center. The new petroleum cement terminal is now fully funded, on time and on budget. I worked with the teams that turned on 311, that moved APD back downtown, that established new ambulance service, that cleaned up the Northern Lights Inn and the Bear Valley Junkyard. I wrote ordinances to improve healthcare transparency, to reward construction downtown and affordable housing on transit lines. We restored law enforcement to Girdwood and the Seward Highway, and crime decreased across the board after I became manager. But we do have our work ahead of us. We do have to champion the COVID recovery, make real progress on homelessness, complete the port, preserve our public safety gains, and make those quality of life investments that will really take us to the next level. Again, I'm Bill Falsey. Appreciate the chance to be here, and I would be honored to have your vote.
Thank you, Mr. Falsey. Next, we'll hear from Mr. Forrest Dunbar.
Well, thank you, Tani, and to Meg and to all the other organizers that made tonight possible. This was a great event. We all know that Anchorage faces really tough challenges right now. The current public health crisis is on all of our minds, but I believe, and I hope you do too, that brighter days are ahead for our city. We get there by tackling this public health crisis, not ignoring it, so we can get our economy back on track, provide good jobs and affordable homes to the people of Anchorage, and diversify our economy. That is what most people in Anchorage really want, real solutions, not divisive rhetoric. I'm doing the work now in the Assembly to bring those real solutions to Anchorage, and I'll be ready to continue that work on day one. Our campaign has built a broad coalition of support, put forward a detailed policy platform, and offered a positive vision of where the city can go, both for immediate recovery and for long-term economic growth. I'm running for Anchorage to get us past this public health crisis, to get all of our kids back to school, and to get Anchorage back to work. I appreciate you inviting me today. My name is Forrest Dunbar. I'd be honored to have your vote. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Dunbar. And finally, we'll hear from Mr. Bill Evans.
Thank you, Tanya, and thank you for the Anchorage Community Councils for this event. We have a lot of challenges in front of us, but the 21st century is tailor-made for Anchorage. It is the first century in which distance doesn't matter as much, in which capital and jobs are more fluid. This is the century in which Anchorage can capitalize on all of its natural resources. But in order to do that, we have to solve our problems. We have to get our economy turned around. We have to be pro-business so that we can attract investment. We have to get our homelessness situation taken care of. We have to be able to solve our crime problem. And we have to decide how we're going to do that. And the way to do that is not political divisiveness. We have to work together as a community. I have a record when I was on the Assembly of working for reasonable solutions, getting big things done, breaking up the taxi cartel, getting the Equal Rights Amendment passed. I've worked with people across the aisle to get things done, and I can do the same thing as mayor. And that's what we should do going forward. Thank you very much.
And with that final response, that concludes the 2021 West Anchorage Mayoral Candidates Forum. Thank you again to the candidates for their participation tonight. And I would also like to extend a very special appreciation to those 7 candidates that stayed for the entirety of this forum. We would also like to thank all the members of the public who watched this evening. I'm so pleased to share that we had over 260 attendees tonight, which I can confidently say is the best attended forum in our history. We hope that this forum has been informative, and no matter who or what you support, the West Anchorage Community Councils urge you to please vote. As a reminder, the 2021 regular municipal election is Tuesday, April 6th. Ballots were mailed out this past Monday, March 15th, and I know some folks have already started receiving them. If you have any questions or issues regarding your ballot or have other voting questions, you can call the voter hotline at 907-243-VOTE. That's 907-243-8683, or visit muni.org/elections. Lastly, I want to end tonight with a huge shout out to all of the dedicated and hardworking members of the Planning Committee for helping create and run another wildly successful candidates forum. We will be staying on the line to debrief tonight's event, but for the rest of you, I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. And it looks like we're getting done with 3 minutes to spare.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you and good night.
Goodbye.
Great job, timekeeper.
Thank you. Good job staying on track, guys.